All right, we're going to start moving along. Welcome everybody to the webinar on Unraveling the Ins and Outs of Retro Commissioning. This webinar is being hosted by the Southwest Pennsylvania Energy Efficiency Roundtable. First off, we have a question. According to Energy Star, what are the average energy savings achieved by completing a successful retro commissioning project in a commercial building? So far, no one has offered to figure out the chat. That's totally fine. We're going to move along. If you have a question, please use the chat or the Q&A. The answer is B, by the way. So it's about 15% give take here, average, which is pretty good odds for any type of project, but retro commissioning is with existing plants. So, Housekeeping tips and suggestions. All attendees are automatically muted with their cameras off. Attendees can submit questions anytime through the Q&A and or chat. We will field questions as we see them pop up. Feel free to ask. We will hold a Q&A at the end as well. Follow-up questions, if you think of something later or have a more detailed question, feel free to send them to pentap@psu.edu, or any of our partners who are going to be listed at the end of this webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our events page. It will also be sent to you in follow-up, and we are also going to send this PowerPoint slide deck out to everybody. There's a lot of hyperlinks, a lot of useful tools, so we want to make sure everybody can click on those hyperlinks. So with that, I would like to introduce the Southwest Pennsylvania Energy Efficiency Roundtable. Our mission is to help the businesses and industry in Southwest Pennsylvania reduce energy costs through improved energy management, energy efficiency optimization, and implementation of cutting-edge technology. The Roundtable provides a forum for large industrial and commercial energy users to share information and learn from experts on various energy topics, ranging from energy efficiency technologies to energy management strategies. Currently, the group is made up of First Energy, Willdan, Duquesne Light, Peoples Gas, Franklin Energy, the Energy Programs Office of the Department of Environmental Protection, and PennTap, Pennsylvania Technical Assistance Program. We've also had contributing partnerships with Kia, Keystone Energy Efficiency Alliance, and SMC Small Business Council. We've had past programs on combined heat and power, solar programs and feasibility, compressed air systems, lighting and controls, and chillers. Please note that if there is a topic you would like us to pursue and present on, please drop a note in the chat or send any of us on the roundtable a note saying, hey, we would like to learn more about XYZ. We're always interested to find out what you want to learn more about so we can find that expert to come present. Today's agenda. So we're going to go through introductions, and then HEPE is going to go through their presentation. We're going to go into utility incentives, additional funding programs and resources, our takeaways, and then formal question and answer. With that, I am your host today. My name is Alana Colvin. I am a technical advisor for PennTap. While PennTap serves all of Pennsylvania, I work out of the Southwest region, performing energy audits, supporting grant applications, and working on community economic development projects throughout our counties. More information about me can be found on PennTap's website. Today, though, we have a guest speaker. We have Ryan Hoffman. Stephanie was going to speak today. However, late last week, something came up and Ryan stepped in to do this presentation on her behalf, which we very much appreciate. Thank you, Ryan. Do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself before we go into your presentation?
Yeah, sure. Good morning. I appreciate everyone taking some time out to learn about this concept of retro commissioning. Yeah, I'm Ryan Hoffman with HEPE. HEPE is a 75-year-old organization that focuses on the built environment, and a lot of that work for me is in improving the way buildings operate. My background's in mechanical engineering, but I've spent the last 16 or 17 years really focused on improving the way buildings perform, either as they come out of the ground during new construction or as they have been operating for some period of time. And that's really the focus for today, is in this concept of retro commissioning. And then, yeah, Stephanie is a more local point of contact and had some direct involvement in the case study that we'll share later. And she had an unfortunate death in the family and is getting back into the swing of things later this week. So feel free to reach out to Stephanie at any point as well. So yeah, we'll jump right in, and you can go to the next slide, Alana. Today we really want to cover this concept of retro commissioning, which is a big word that is actually fairly simple to understand, regardless of your background. And what I would offer as it relates to the pure definition, there's no slide for this. Think of retro commissioning as a building tune-up, and just like your car, right? When it's brand new, there's a published fuel mileage in miles per gallon. And when the vehicle's new, it's very common that you'll achieve that fuel efficiency. Well, over time, buildings, just like your car, it requires not only routine maintenance, changing the oil and that kind of thing, but in the case of a building, it requires you to really pay close attention to the decisions that the building is making and the operating parameters that ultimately then determine, in the case of our industry, energy use intensity is maybe the common metric that I would use to parallel with miles per gallon of fuel efficiency. So we know that energy use intensity, or EUI, and energy use per square foot is impacted by a lot of things, but in the case of retro commissioning, really think of it as tuning up those building systems and bringing that EUI back into focus and back toward that original operating condition. So we'll talk today a little bit about the benefits and cover some case studies to really drive those home. And then we'll talk about incentives. I'm very fortunate in the state of Pennsylvania to have tremendous incentive programs across many of the utilities that participate in PennTap to incentivize retro commissioning and make sure that you can get started to really achieve the benefits. So within the next slide, I guess what I would ask you to think about, and I would love for some engagement through the chat, if possible, that allow me to kind of not only field your questions, but also speak to the points that matter most to you all. I'd like for you to think about this question and either post immediately in the chat or as you have things come to mind, or at minimum, let this frame some of your questions for today. This concept of retro commissioning is very often focused on improving energy performance. But what you'll see kind of through the conversation today is that many times the most impactful things that we do through retro commissioning are fixed problems, fixed challenges that keep building operators laying awake at night and create a level of stress around the building and how it's serving in its core function. Because, after all, buildings really do exist to, house some function, whether it's a hospital treating patients, a higher education institution educating students, or an office building, being sure that people can be productive and complete their day-to-day tasks. Whatever that building might serve in terms of its core function, we know that it has a set of operating conditions or parameters that are expected, and those are often the number one point of focus for building operators. So within the next slide, then, I guess if you could imagine, I like this slide because it almost looks like this visionary, right? If you had a confidence in your building systems and you could really kind of, as a building operator or as a customer you might be working with in this space, if there was this confidence around building systems and their operation, and that you, as an operator, you could rest assured that they were operating at peak efficiency, but also peak performance with regard to things like air quality, indoor air quality, and temperature, humidity levels, things like this. And within the next slide, when in the absence of that confidence, right, often what we face is in working with customers is something that looks a little bit like this. It's a cold call, it's a hot call, it's a condition where the building is not functioning in a way that's productive. And we know that retro commissioning can improve energy efficiency, but what I would offer to you is that within these same building systems that impact that energy consumption exists the opportunity to really tune up and improve the true performance of the system so that this condition doesn't occur. And in the next slide, we know that spaces, when done right, feel as good as they look. This is a library project that we had the opportunity to actually work on when it was new and commission it originally, but then go back and retro commission it about 5 or 6 years in. And the picture, what the picture doesn't tell you is how comfortable are all of these people in the space? How good is the indoor air quality? Does the experience in the space feel as good as it appears in the photo with all the natural daylight and the vibrance of the space? And that's what retro commissioning aims to do. It's really this deep dive into building systems, how they're making their decisions, and ultimately how well they're doing at performing. And I say performing, that is a big word within buildings. Okay, so let's go a little bit further. The next slide then. I mean, this is more of I say the textbook definition. Um, you know, ASHRAE and a few other industry standards exist around retro commissioning. And I would say it efficiently and effectively are good words in parallel, because what we don't like to do in the retro commissioning space is sacrifice any of the comfort. So let's say the building is operating quite well. Let's say there are no hot or cold calls. We'll often go in with a conversation around retro commissioning, and one of the first questions we get is, I've got a lot of pride in the way my building's operating, and I've worked very hard to get it to the point where it is comfortable. Is retro commissioning going to undo that? Are we going to create a building that's cold just in the interest of saving a few BTUs or a few metric tons of carbon? And the answer, at least for us, as we view it, is no. It must be efficient, but it also must be effective at performing its core function. So then on the next slide, the ways that we typically see customers win are the benefits that we typically strive for. I've driven home the comfort point. I won't belabor that. Building controls and the simplification of those is something I haven't mentioned, but is worth a bit of note. Most buildings today, most commercial buildings of any significant size, have a computerized system that controls how the building makes its decisions, from natural gas and steam and electricity in, all the way out to the space temperature that you're trying to maintain. That building control system makes all of the core decisions around that system and its performance and function. So if we can simplify that by taking some of the decisions and bringing them forward so that the user can view them, but also really, driving home the sequences of operation that make the most sense for the facility, not just the ones that are sort of, what I would call textbook or initially programmed within the system, then we can create a simplicity where the building owner understands and has a level of training on how that system is really making its decisions. So with that, then you end up with improved indoor air quality and reduced energy costs, the things that I've talked about. And I'll talk more about incentives and paybacks and such here in the next couple of slides. So what does this process actually look like? The first thing, honestly, is really understanding how the building's performing today, how it was designed to perform originally. And that requires us to gather, basic information like drawings and sequences of operation, O&M, referring to operating and maintenance logs that might exist, and then utility data. We usually try to get at least 2 years of utility data to really see the patterns. And through utility analysis, we can normalize for things like outside weather and the variation there, and even things like occupant count or density within the space. So then a lot of the analysis is really focused on a building control system, or sometimes what you might call a building automation system, or BAS. It's really looking, not only at what you can see in the graphic sort of user interface of the control system, but we like to look deeper into the programming and some of the behind the scenes decisions that system's making. And from there, right, we can understand, is the temperature in the space a product of, these 5 or 6 things, and then how do we go about assessing, are those the right points of consideration and parameters for that system to be taking into account? And that's where recommendations come in. We will make recommendations commonly in collaboration with a customer. The goal really is to be sure that the customer has a full awareness to the items that we're proposing prior to them entering or ending up in a report, with the thought that if something really isn't going to be effective from the customer's perspective, what we love to see is that the measures that are recommended and implemented stay in place for as long as possible. The industry would point to a common retro commissioning cycle of every 5 to 7 years. And if we can create recommendations today that'll exist for that period and beyond, that's a product of really that collaboration from and buy-in and understanding as well from the get-go. And then implementation, at least as we view it, is often by others. We will rely heavily on the controls industry and the organizations that support these buildings to really come in and do some of that heavy lift. Again, a lot of it is programming. Not always a lot of hardware involved. It's more labor than it is material, so to speak. And then a good project, we like to come back and really do measurement and verification. And certainly that's expected within the utility programs as well. So this list of opportunities that, I'm happy to address questions or speak to any of these in more detail. And these are just, I would say, maybe our top 10 or so that we see most often. Very common or very basic example would be scheduling the building so that it has some level of setback after hours, all the way to maybe the more complex things like a demand control ventilation and really looking at resets of air and water temperatures and things like this. So there's not a one size fits all list of opportunities for every building. And again, if you work in a healthcare setting versus a school or an office, there's a lot of different guardrails that we need to work within as we consider these different opportunities. So I thought I would go into, in the next couple of slides here, some case studies, so to speak. And this one looks like my circle moved a little bit, but the circle is really pointing out the return on investment that you see within that summary on the right. And this is a study that's pretty dated now, but also pretty consistent with what we still see today. This is a data set of 100 existing buildings that Lawrence Berkeley studied, and very consistent with, excuse me, Energy Star. They had seen a 15% savings across those projects at an 8-month payback, which is just really, really incredible. So within our, excuse me, I'm still battling a little bit of a cold here. I'll clear my throat a bit. Within the next few slides, really what we'll do is try to cover some of the projects that we've actually experienced and how they align, ultimately with this study. So the first, and maybe one that's near and dear to many of you, if you've visited or attended conferences at the facility, is the David Lawrence Convention Center. We're very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with Advantis engineers, a tremendous group of individuals that is also very passionate about this kind of work. And with Advantis, we went in and really leveraged the Duquesne Light incentive program to, for me, I think the best way to describe it is make magic happen. That's what I like to say about retro commissioning. Just incredible numbers on the screen, and all the while improving the way the facility feels and operates day to day. And if you look at the payback without incentives at 8 months, really what the incentive did, right, was it encouraged the customer to consider this opportunity. And many customers now have gotten through some of the basic energy conservation measures, like most notably LED lighting replacements. And so they're kind of, we've talked to a lot of customers that are a bit stuck on, what do I do next? We brought the incentive program forward to the convention center, and the framework that Duquesne Light has allowed them to pretty easily process the decision. And that got the study completed that ultimately visualized for them the potential that you see here. So that is really the key first step, I would say, is getting in the hands of a particular building or customer or operator. What is it that I can do specific for my facility? And what's the return on investment? What's the carbon emissions reduction? What's the impact on the building? And the numbers look like this so often that in fact, if you go to the next case study, I think the next one's even a bit better. Um, that it becomes very straightforward and clear to the customer that these opportunities or these improvements to the facility are essential and must be done. Just to switch to an office building for a second. This is a kind of a medium-sized office building. Very comparable results where you're creating a 1-year payback, and with incentives in play, just this incredible payback that's measured in months. The next slide will show a bit more of the same. Even when we get into the lab environment, I would say we often say for retro commissioning, the more complex the building, the more opportunity you can typically find. So in this space, it's a little bit of office, but mostly lab. They have a lot of clean rooms. Um, we found a tremendous amount of gas and electric savings, again, at a really incredible payback. And what you might notice through all of these at the project cost, often is $100,000 represents a big project. And, like this one here is a little more common, right? $38,000 worth of work, again, mostly labor. It becomes an easy thing for a customer to be able to even pull from an existing budget or maybe a set of operating expenses. Okay, I think I've got one more case study. Yeah, so this one is in a higher education environment. And again, they each look very similar, but I wanted to illustrate a few different types of buildings just simply to share that most medium to large commercial buildings that we walk into have some level of opportunity, and that the simple payback point, or the amount of impact that you can make over what's typically about a 6-month period. Maybe the longest projects we see are 10 or 12 months. So in that period, right, you can make such an impact on the facility where they're, you know, 50, 75, $100,000 a year in energy cost benefit. And for many organizations now, it's not only that cost benefit, but the impact toward their carbon neutrality goals, or their goals toward environmental performance that really matter. And this is alongside of lighting, and especially if lighting's already been complete. This is certainly one of the things that we turn to. Okay, so how do incentives help? The Duquesne Light program, as I mentioned, we leveraged at the David Lawrence Convention Center. A really nice program here, and Alana will talk a bit more about it. It is a simple program in that it just simply pays 8 cents per kilowatt hour of savings that's verified, and it will cover up to 100% of the study and implementation cost. So just incredible and really consistent with the case studies that you saw. It creates a scenario where not only the study and that engineering up front can be in part or in whole covered by the incentive program, but also the customers getting, again, part or all of their money back that they've spent to hire outside vendors to actually complete the work. So maybe the single largest question that I get outside of, will this make my building less comfortable, is there some type of is there some type of catch associated with these programs? And the answer is really there's not. It's the next opportunity that the utility companies are interested in incentivizing to work toward their Act 129 goals. And for customers, if you've got the right building, it becomes really a no-brainer.
And with that, I'm going to interject with a couple slides for Duquesne Light and also the other programs a little bit later. But since Duquesne Light was mentioned, you can learn more about their programs on this link. Again, we'll send out the slide deck so that you would have this link clickable. Their programs team. So you have Duquesne Light. Earl Serrain is available if you would like to learn more about the programs from Duquesne Light level, but also know that they have a CSP who is Franklin Energy, and Liz McQuaid is the senior program manager there, and she has all the information you need as well for the incentives programs that are provided with Duquesne Light. They're the ones who come out and help you create those incentives. There's custom incentives, there are direct incentives. It just depends on your project. All of their information is here and also later in the program, but wanted to highlight that. To highlight again, Act 129 and its program, it's phase 4 right now. It's running from June 2021, so it's been around for this year now, and it's going through 2026, May 2026. All projects must be completed after June 2021, or it's considered the previous phase. Be sure to submit documentation within the first 180 days after a project is completed. And a project completion means that you have installed the light bulb and turned the light bulb on, so it's now active. It is burning energy, if you will. There are cash incentives available on first come, first served basis. It's a pot of money, and when the money runs out, the money runs out. So although the program wants to run until 2026, when the rebates stop, that's when we wait until the next phase can hit. No pre-approval required through Duquesne Light, but I always recommend reaching out to Duquesne Light and Franklin Energy to make sure that the project makes sense, that you have the correct equipment that can receive benefits, receive those incentives, and also to make sure you don't shorthand yourself. Maybe you were looking at the project one way. Their engineering staff can really help you understand, is that the most appropriate option, or could you do something different that will enhance your project? To highlight, they have 4 buckets, if you will. Again, if you went to that link on that one first slide, that will show you all of the details on all of these buckets. But you have that small business, you have business solutions, a little bit larger business segment, midstream instant program, and then the virtual commissioning program. I want to note that the program is not quote unquote marketed. That just really means it's a very customized program. If you're going through the commissioning process, you could be doing multiple different things, and what they, meaning Duquesne Light and Franklin Energy, will do is help you understand how to get the best incentive for all of your projects. So if you do have a retro commissioning project in mind, reach out so that you can get the most out of that project. You will have to do studies. You will have to participate in delivering data. So if you start implementing things, even though it says no pre-approval required, you might shorthand yourself if you start implementing things without engaging with this group. So just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Yeah, so First Energy's incentives are in place for retro commissioning as well. And in a similar kind of way, the first steps revolve around identifying a project and confirming it's a good candidate, and then jumping into a study that ultimately rolls into implementation and measurement and verification. And then, excuse me, for First Energy, their study incentive is separate from implementation, but just know that they cover up to 50% of the study cost, or $10,000, whichever is less. And then the implementation incentive is toward the actual verified savings, and is intended to pay for, really that sort of installation or implementation effort.
Jumping back in, so with First Energy Solutions, there is First Energy, and under them, they have Franklin Energy, similar to Duquesne Light, just their organization part. And then there is also Willdan. Franklin Energy is really in charge of those prescriptive, midstream, and custom rebates when you're looking at equipment. And then you can come in with Willdan if you have a large project in mind. A large project meaning you are interfacing multiple pieces of equipment. You will work with Franklin and with Willdan. So Willdan, you're looking at new construction, custom building, and that retro commissioning tune-up process as well. I wanted to highlight the Franklin team. So if you had any questions, you can reach out to Deanna Weaver. She's out here in Westmoreland County, but there are all the other officers as well. And this link here will take you to the technical resource page where you can see all about the different rebate options and what makes sense. Similar to Duquesne Light. So again, it's the Act 129 phase 4. So a little bit different because it is First Energy's program. So it says pre-approval not required, but recommended. First Energy would like to be engaged early on with your project so that they can understand how to develop that rebate with you, and also how you tend to flow down your projects. So Lighting must be DLC or Energy Star. They have that in their kickoff slide here. That's very important. And again, making sure that you have the appropriate equipment that can receive a rebate. Wanted to highlight that CHP and solar must be pre-approved. So in that case, we're not required. It is required for those projects, different programs. They have highlighted here the types of performance incentives and custom rebates. The link at the bottom there will also get you to these rebate sections. One of the things that I wanted to highlight based on what Ryan mentioned was that 10-cent rebate. Well, that's coming through with Willdan. So you have Franklin Energy has a specific rebate incentive, but with Willdan, you can actually have a tiered incentive program, which can make it even more than the 5 cents that's typical. It can go up to 10 cents. It can go, I believe, even higher. All questions can be vetted through Willdan. I have their generic information here, but there is also staff at the end of the slide deck that you can reach out to as well. But here, the clickable program, you can read more about Willdan and how they're interfacing with First Energy and all of the different programs they have under there. They're retuning their equipment and the new construction. From there, I'm just going to keep on rolling with other programs that we have out there. Always check in with People's Gas if you have natural gas. Douglas Bush is on the Southwest PA Roundtable, so I'm just highlighting his information here, but on People's website, there's a lot of information on how to keep up with your systems. And it's always good to double check too to see if it's, they have programs that they are incentivizing, so it's not the same thing as a rebate per se, but maybe there's a program out there that you can take advantage of to enhance what you have going on with your natural gas or other type of fuels as it relates to People's. We also have the Energy Programs Office. Dave is our local Southwest area representative. There are multiple funding opportunities through the DEP department. I have 2 links here. One is the generic website page, and then the other one is financial options. Here you can see the generic website page, and by generic, I just mean you have everything you can click on and review. It's not just sending you to the finance page. You can see everything. So you have energy, efficiency and conservation, renewables, transportation. You can take a look at data, and you can take a look at the other types of funding programs out there. All of these different programs have even more information. Highly recommend checking it out as it can enhance your retro commissioning project. Also want to highlight PennTap, which is my organization. We are statewide. We work on energy efficiency programs and also try to connect you with other sources out there. So our partners, Penn State University, and economic development resources that are available, such as these funding opportunities. We are grant funded and housed within the Office of Industrial Partnerships at Penn State. We are charged with supporting the Pennsylvania businesses, mostly small to mid-sized manufacturers and startups, but also we'll look into anchor institutions, which includes municipalities, educational institutions, and our economic development agencies. We began our work over 50 years ago as one of the first technical assistance programs in the country. Our services, if you will, we have a focus on energy and environment, which pairs right into that retro commissioning. PennTap will come through. We will look at your systems. We will assess and say, hey, here's a priority list of what you should tackle. By the way, here are resources you should go out to partner with your project. So whether that be funding based or again, economic development agencies or Penn State. Our innovation side, we have a lot of engagement with Penn State offices, and we look to see if we can connect you with faculty, research staff, students. We look at product and process development, particularly in manufacturing, but any startup is welcome to go through this process. There's a lot of capstones available through Penn State, internships, and entrepreneurial assistance. There's additional funding out there and or resources. So I wanted to give a shout out to Desire. Desire is a database specifically, so not an entity of sorts. You can go there. It's desireusa.org. Very important if you want to get to the right website. So if you're going to go there, you can click on Pennsylvania. You can see all the state funded programs and federal funded programs in the state of Pennsylvania. Now, granted, they will not have all of the different programs out there. You will see, like, you're going to see your utilities programs programs, you're going to see federal programs and some state office programs like the DEP's programs, but you might not see community programs. Check in with your redevelopment authorities, check in with county level offices. We have the Department of Community and Economic Development as well, DCED. They have a lot of funding opportunities. Highly recommend checking out their page. In the Southwest region, we have Innovation Works. They are very helpful with any entrepreneur or innovation, as in startup manufacturing line, robotics, looking into taking that next step with your company. They have a lot of programs there and a lot of internship programs too. SBDCs are very helpful as a free resource for you to look into what else can I do with my business, not just energy, but other things. You have your IRC networks. If you're a manufacturer and you need guidance, you need extra help, you need some funding, want some resources. Catalyst Connection is the one in the Southwest PA region. Highly recommend reaching out to them and learning more about their programs. Also, a shout out to USDA. USDA, you need to be in a rural location. So if you are within the city boundaries, the USDA will not be able to help, but Southwest PA covers more than just Allegheny. So I wanted to give a shout out to them as well. There's a lot of programs through USDA, energy programs as well. I want everybody to check back in 2023 for part 2 of this. So right now, Ryan went over a high level of retro commissioning, but like he mentioned, the David L. Lawrence Convention Center is going through their recommissioning process right now. And next year, we're going to have a tour of the building to see what was done, what savings are they expecting, what's happening now. In order to stay connected with that, I recommend, tuning into the PennTap events. It will be posted there. But an easy way to do that is just to subscribe, and you'll see it in the newsletter. Anything that happens in the Southwest PA area, whether it's funding, programming, our partners programming, we try to highlight as much as we can to make sure that you get anything that's available to you in front of you. So key takeaways today. Retro commissioning optimizes existing building systems so that they operate efficiently and effectively. As Ryan mentioned, the Environmental Protection Agency EPA Energy Star program estimates that retro commissioning can achieve energy savings of 15% in commercial buildings and payback in the initial investment within 8 to 9 months, which was all in line with the examples that Ryan was showing. Some of them had a little bit higher payback, but at the same rate, everything was within that year boundary. There's a lot of potential for, even though it's a deep dive project and there's a capital up front, that you will receive that capital back within 1 year. Work with your utilities, work with your local, state, and federal programs in order to capitalize on all project funding and incentives, whether the incentives are program related or maybe they're equipment related. This is also, again, to reiterate, part 1 of a 2-part event. So make sure to subscribe with PennTap because we'll make sure you stay informed. And then part 2 of the series will be featuring the David L. Lawrence Convention Center. With that, I would like to go into question answer. Does anybody have any questions for Ryan? Oh, so quiet. I have 2 questions. So if people are thinking of questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A or the chat function. Either way works. Again, too, if you have a question that comes up later, feel free to email anybody on the Southwest PAEE Roundtable. Our contact information is going to be on the next page, or email Stephanie and Ryan with a direct question. Either way, all of it works. One question that I had was, do you have any rules of thumb for energy retro commissioning projects? Like if for every square foot that you retro commission or something of that nature, you get to save XYZ. Is there something that you say to people to say, this is what you should expect if you go through with a project?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alana. We do usually frame it in terms of percent
Mhm.
total utility, either cost or consumption. So, I wouldn't say that we go into every building thinking that 15% is achievable. That was what was mentioned from Energy Star, and I do think that is achievable in some buildings. But kind of the first step that we would take is have a conversation with a building owner to understand how they're operating the building just in general today. Some basic questions like, is the building scheduled? Is it taking advantage of resets and things like that? Do you have an ongoing kind of, I'll say, maintenance program or have some type of service agreement around the building control system. And then, understanding the customer's willingness to make changes to the way the building's operating today. And all of those things put together will usually point us at maybe a rule of thumb as a percentage that is a little more customized, or specific for that individual project. And then from there, I mean, just know that retro commissioning can mean a few different things. I didn't cover that in the beginning, but sometimes a customer or building owner will ask, simply for a retro commissioning effort that really, puts all of the equipment through its paces as if it were, being newly installed. So the industry would sometimes call that functional testing, meaning we're gonna, turn the thermostat down and see if it provides more heat, and turn the thermostat up and I said that backwards. Turning the thermostat down should provide more cooling, and turning the temperature set point up should allow for more heating. That's a very basic example, but within all of the systems really running through a detailed functional test, we'll often find things that have malfunctioned or are broken since the original installation, and that's a different process, but also can be equally as impactful or advantageous, and not always pointed at that same final target of energy performance as much as it is just functionality.
Okay, we got a question in the Q&A forum.
Sure.
What is the timeline for a project from a yes, I want to do this to getting the final incentive check?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. There are the variables in that are understanding that the study itself, the first part, is usually around 30 to 60 days, and allowing for implementation of most commonly more like 60 to 90 days. That's the bulk of the effort, and then measurement and verification at the end, maybe another 30 days there. Most commonly, projects are done in the 6-month to 12-month window of time. We've had projects as quick as 5 or 6 months, and as long as, say, 10 to 12 months.
Okay. Do you recommend or have a recommendation on staggering projects? Now, I know that retro commissioning does a lump of projects at once, but I'm looking at from a capital standpoint, are there like a minimum requirement of the number of projects you should be doing in order to be considered this a good idea for a building to go through?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. A lot of times we'll work with a building owner in the beginning of one of these projects to understand, an overarching budget for implementation, knowing that the incentive programs often provide so much money back that at minimum it becomes kind of a, if we can not exceed this number, that fits within their capital budget and so forth. But know that it's that number then becomes, okay, well, what can we find that represents the best use of that certain dollar amount? Most commonly, though, a framework is, let's look for as many things under a 2-year payback as we can find, and then give the customer the opportunity to kind of, a menu of different things that can be implemented, whether that, is immediately or out in the future. I would say most customers, though, when they see the kinds of paybacks that, that 1-year point is really common, there's usually not a lot of challenge in finding either O&M dollars, like operating expense capital, or, an actual, putting in a capital request for some type of funding, because the payback is so strong. That's usually one of the criteria that makes them, easy to get done right away, to answer your question.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else have any other questions? Right here. What criteria does my building need to meet in order to get retro commissioning done?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. So I would say within the framework that we were describing today, so much of the opportunity exists within a building automation system or that digital controls platform, that's really the main prerequisite or criteria that we would often look at. And really small buildings don't often have a digital control system, and then some buildings, even if more medium or large in size, or if they're older, they might have a system that's pneumatically controlled where there's not much visibility into what decisions are being made, and ultimately how the pieces and parts are coming together to create a comfortable environment. And that makes it really challenging because um, you're not really sure where to focus, right? If you have a system with that, with a really old, control system. So that's the major prerequisite, I would say, is digital HVAC controls. Sometimes we say the newer the building, the better because of that criteria. It's certainly not uncommon for us to go into buildings that are 2, 3, 5 years old, and make a lot of opportunity come forward, particularly where the building wasn't maybe commissioned when it was new. And then maybe the only other criteria that I would at least throw out to consider is the complexity of the building and its systems. So, many commercial buildings have packaged rooftop units. It's a very common system. There's a little bit of, I'll say, tuning that you can do within this concept on a system like that if it has digital controls, but not as much as say a more sophisticated building. Um, and just know that that's not a limiting factor, but at least as a consideration as we look at a building's eligibility is how complex are the systems, and therefore how much sort of tuning can you do.
Okay. Thank you. And we have another question that popped in.
Sure.
Would a 10-year-old building be a sweet spot?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think between 5 and 10 years, something in that period. Um, like I say, the industry kind of points to every 5 years as a reasonable amount of time to consider retro commissioning, because in the absence of this concept of monitoring based commissioning, which I won't endeavor to cover in a lot of detail today, just in the interest of time, the industry points to buildings really drifting a little bit each year. And so, if you with retro commissioning come back and really adjust that performance back to best practice, over time that will slowly erode away. And I think, certainly 10 years out, there's going to be a good bit of opportunity.
What is the most repetitive issue you have found doing the retro commissioning projects?
It's interesting. Probably the most common issue that we see, or the simplest but also most common, is one and the same, and that's simply scheduling the building in a proper way. So, think of that as most buildings that we go into are heating or cooling the building in the middle of the night when no one is there. And, it's a simple thing to adjust, but it makes, let's take an office building, for example. If you can take even, 12 hours of the day and set the building back, you're really not turning the systems off as much as you would be letting the temperature maybe drift up in the summertime and drift down a little bit in the wintertime. That's a tremendous amount of energy just in that opportunity alone. And then, yeah, from there, I mean, there's a lot of, I would say, um, f- programming within the controls platform that is not as refined as it can be. Meaning that it's taking a one path to get from point A to point B that may not be the best path.
Nice. Awesome questions, everybody. Really appreciate it. It makes the conversation so much stronger. Oh, more questions. How do I find someone to do the initial study? What is step one?
Yeah, so I mean, I think each of the utilities largely have a network of sort of pre-approved study providers, is what you might call them. So I definitely think reaching out to the points of contact that Alana mentioned within the utility programs is valuable. For us as a CSP in this space, often will look to at a company and their credentials, and whether or not this is the type of expertise, because it's a kind of a marry between the theory of how a building should work and the actual practice that creates the best partner for something like this. The theory stops at the limitation of what that specific building is capable of, and within a study team, if they've got a good deal of experience kind of seeing things firsthand, you can often look at, well, you know a setback is appropriate in most buildings, but in this building, because of this limiting factor, that theory is not going to play out. So just, yeah, considering that experience and qualifications, I think, is a key piece too.
Wanted to throw out there too, PennTap will do walkthroughs as well. So we
Oh,
have
great.
grant provided vouchers is how I explain them. So if you are a manufacturer in the state of Pennsylvania under 500 employees, the voucher will pay for an initial study. This is a not as intense. So we're not hooking up sensors. We have some sensors, but we're not going to live there. We're going to come in through one day and we're going to give you a priority. And what we're going to show you is that, hey, you have the opportunity to save with these systems. You should go and find someone and start making this happen. So we, PennTap, are non-biased. We're not going to say, hey, you should go shopping and get light bulbs from XYZ, but we'll give you the details on, hey, you need to get light bulbs that meet this criteria. And by the way, there's funding over here, or there's support over here. There's vetted programs this way. So what PennTap's sweet spot is just making sure that a client understands what's happening and then what should they do next. And we can also vet out projects that might not make sense. Some people, sometimes they get very hyper focused on something, say like, oh my gosh, the HVAC's terrible, the HVAC's terrible. And it's really not the HVAC, it's really your windows. Like, so we can help you with our tools and show you what is happening. We can go through, we do HVAC, compressed air, lighting, building envelope, boiler systems. There's a whole bunch of different pieces of equipment, and we can help you understand how is it functioning and what does that cost look like, and then play out a scenario of the improvement that can be made. So just wanted to throw that out too. Anything else? No. Well, if you have any questions, if you want to learn more about anyone's programs here, please feel free to send a follow-up email to anyone in particular. Right here, we have different head of programs names. So from there, we can get you to the right people. PennTap, if you have an interest in PennTap working with us, working with Penn State, feel free to reach out and we can understand if the project makes sense or not. We do have other funding too to do walkthroughs for other businesses as it makes sense. So basically, you never know the answer until you ask. So just always ask and then find out if there's something that you can go through with. Our information, my information's here. If you need anything, please let us know. And thank you.